He was born without a crown, without an army, without a prophecy from the gods. Yet thousands of years later, his name is still taught in every school on earth. This is the story of a man who did not conquer the world with a sword, but with his mind. Aristotle, the student, the wanderer, and finally, the teacher of all humankind. In Stagira, a small city in northern Greece, a young boy watched his father, a royal physician. From his father's hands, he learned the first thing that would one day change the world, that everything has a cause. As a teenager, he walked hundreds of kilometers to Athens to study under the shadow of Plato, the legend. At the academy, Aristotle was not just a student, he was an unending questioner. If form is everything, he once asked his teacher, then where is the place for change? That single question, one small sentence, began to crack the foundations of idealist philosophy. But after 2 decades, he left, not out of hatred, but because he thought too far ahead. He founded his own school, the Lyceum, where young men walked while they discussed, observing animals, writing about logic, politics, and the soul. But peace never lasts. After his teacher's death, Athens changed. Politics burned, ideas became weapons. Aristotle was accused of blasphemy against the gods. He whispered before fleeing the city, "I will not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy," a bitter echo of Socrates' death. In exile, he wrote his final works on cause, ethics, and truth. He died far from the city that once rejected his mind. Yet ironically, the world that had expelled him would later kneel to his logic. Kings, scientists, theologians, and even digital machines all still speak in his language. Under Plato's shadow he learned, but the deeper he went, the wider the distance grew between student and teacher. For Aristotle, truth was greater than respect. And that was the beginning of the quietest rebellion in the history of philosophy. Plato said, "The true world exists in the realm of ideas, perfect, eternal, unchanging." But Aristotle looked at the world around him. Trees grow. Animals are born and die. Humans think and change their minds. If the real world is just a shadow, he thought, why does this shadow seem more alive than the idea? He began to record, dissecting Plato's logic with the precision of a scientist. To Plato, form was everything. To Aristotle, substance contained form. The two could not be separated. Their debate was not merely between two philosophers, but between two ways of understanding reality itself. One night at the academy, Plato stared at his student sharply. "You think this world can be explained without ideas?" Aristotle replied quietly, "I think this world is too real to be called an illusion." Silence, stillness, but from that stillness, the foundations of modern science were born. 2 millennia later, Aristotle's theories of form and substance became the roots of biology, physics, and formal logic, while Plato's world lived only in the dreams of idealists, banished not for crime but for thinking too much. Aristotle left Athens, the city he loved, carrying only a pen, a book, and the belief that truth needs no temple. He wandered to Assos, then to Lesbos, not to teach but to observe life. On that island's shore he found his first laboratory, not a closed room, but the blue sea full of fish and birds circling the sky. He wrote about anatomy, reproduction, and the structure of living beings. To him, the world was no longer a divine mystery, but a puzzle solvable by eyes and reason. Yet every discovery carried a risk. To study nature was to defy the gods. People whispered, he wishes to become one himself. But Aristotle knew, fear only means you're walking the right path. From his notes on Lesbos came the beginnings of biological science. And ironically, it all started not in a modern lab, but with a wanderer armed only with curiosity. Before Alexander conquered the world with his sword, he was first conquered by his teacher's mind. Aristotle did not teach him how to fight. He taught him how to think before waging war. In the palace of Pella, footsteps echoed on marble floors. Before his young pupil, Aristotle unfurled a map of the world. "Look at this," he said. Not just as territory, but as patterns of human thought. Every line on the map was a symbol of power and strategy. He taught Alexander the ethics of rule, how to understand an enemy before striking, and the danger of becoming a god in the eyes of men. Alexander absorbed it all like a sponge, thirsty for meaning. But philosophy and ambition are twin blades. Alexander began to believe he was destined not to understand the world, but to own it. Aristotle grew afraid. His student had learned too well. Years later, on the battlefields of Asia, Alexander told his generals, "True victory is not in conquering land, but in conquering the mind." Those words, an echo from their lessons in Pella, proved that the teacher's mind still lived within the conqueror's body. No grand temples, no altars to gods, only a garden with trees, a path, and voices in debate. There, the world's intellectual revolution began, not from power, but from conversation. The Lyceum was not a school, but an arena for the mind to run free. His students walked beside him, discussing as they moved. Thus, they were called peripatetics, those who walked together. Each step was a new thesis, every breath an experiment. There, Organon was born, the foundation of formal logic. And dozens of books on politics, ethics, and science. He did not write for his age, but for all ages. But beneath the Lyceum's peaceful shade, Athens was boiling. Philosophy was now dangerous. Too many people had begun to think for themselves. Aristotle knew, freedom of thought always demands a price. 1,000 years later, the Lyceum became the model for the modern university, and every classroom in the world is a reflection of that little garden in Athens. There are two things rulers fear most: a drawn sword and a mind that cannot be silenced. Aristotle carried no weapon, but his logic could shake thrones. When he returned to Athens after Alexander conquered Persia, Aristotle was met with both honor and suspicion. To many, he was not just a philosopher. He was the brain behind Macedonia's rise. Yet at the Lyceum, he kept teaching about logos, rationality, and the art of thinking straight in a crooked world. Logic, he said, is the last fortress against deception. He knew, as long as humans can think clearly, no tyranny could last forever. But politics is a subtle poison. Alexander's power became legend, and legends are worshipped more easily than logic. Rumors spread Aristotle had offended the gods. Once again, philosophy became a threat. When charged with impiety, Aristotle did not resist. He simply said, "I will not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy." He left with his head held high, and from that day on, logic officially became the world's most dangerous weapon. Nothing is quieter than the footsteps of a wise man in exile. Yet within that silence, sometimes the loudest voice in human history is born. Aristotle left Athens for Chalcis, a small town on the island of Euboea. No students, no debates, only the sea, his books, and his thoughts. But he never stopped writing. In exile, he shaped his deepest idea, the causa prima, the first cause of all things. If every motion requires a mover, he wrote, then there must be something that moves all things without being moved. A sentence that would become the cornerstone of Western theology and metaphysics. But his body grew old. The world he once filled with words drifted away. Only the sound of waves answered his final question. Can man understand God through logic? A few months later, Aristotle died. But his ideas did not. He left the world. Yet the world never left his mind. Time can erase cities, destroy kingdoms, but it cannot kill an idea. And Aristotle wrote not for his lifetime, but for civilizations yet unborn. Centuries after his death, his works lay hidden in a cellar in Asia Minor, scrolls forgotten, buried under dust and time, until they were rediscovered by Muslim scholars in Baghdad. Thinkers like Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Averroes translated his writings into Arabic, reviving him as if the philosopher had just stopped speaking. From their hands, his ideas flowed back to Europe, rekindling the flame of knowledge that had nearly died. Yet every generation has its own interpretation. Some praised him like a prophet, others rejected him like a devil, but none could ignore him. 1,000 years after his death, the modern university was built upon the logical structure he created. He died as a man, but lived on as a system of thought. The Renaissance was not the rebirth of art, but the rebirth of a long-buried mind. And at its center, one name echoed again: Aristotle. A dark Europe opened its eyes. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas fused faith and reason through Aristotle's teachings. Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton all wrote in the language of logic he designed. Even as science advanced, every theory still began with one thing: a premise. The modern world mocks myths, yet unknowingly walks the path Aristotle drew millennia ago. But times change. Philosophy was replaced by science, logic attacked by relativism. People began to believe that truth is merely opinion. If Aristotle lived today, he might laugh, wet, or weep. Yet in the chaos of information, Aristotle's logic remains the compass. He is no longer just a Greek philosopher. He is the antivirus of modern deceit. The great leave statues, the powerful leave palaces, but only one man left: a way of thinking. Aristotle never imagined his writings would endure 2 millennia. He wrote merely to understand the world, but it was that simplicity that made him eternal. From classrooms to computer algorithms, From political debates to scientific theories, Aristotle's name vibrates in every human conversation about truth. He is not merely a figure of history. He is the foundation beneath logic, law, and morality. Every generation tries to surpass him, but always ends up returning to him, as if his logic were not invention, but nature itself. Perhaps Aristotle never truly died. He lives within every honest argument, every search for cause, every attempt to understand why. As long as humanity keeps asking questions, Aristotle will keep answering.